Imagine if Deku stayed quirkless, learned to fight in every martial arts style in the world, and reeked Black Air Force energy. How would this impact my hero? Well, stay tuned to find out.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Okay guys, so we start our story off with Deku in the Quirk office. At this point, Deku is actually going to be 6 years old. Not because Deku's a late bloomer, but because in this version of events, I decided to make a slight little tweak to the story to make the story make a little bit more sense. Everybody in this version of events, or this little timeline, is going to unlock their quirks at 6 years old. Not because of, like any other reason than just, it's not really that big of a change, and it kind of helps for the story that I'm going for a little bit. You'll see what I mean. That being said though, Deku would basically be in the quirk office when he would essentially be told that he's gonna be quirkless. Deku would look at the doctors, he would drop the toy that he's holding, and he would look up as he would just say, "Mom, the doctor's lying, right?" Inko would look at Izuku as she would be like, she would cover her mouth with her hands, and this is when, just kidding, Deku is not going to be quirkless. So for those of you who were like, "Aw, bro, you finna make Deku quirkless?" "Aw, yeah." Nope. Deku's gonna have a quirk. But don't worry though, it's not gonna be that big of a deal. Deku is of course going to be told that he does actually have a quirk in this version, and that quirk is going to be called mimicry. Deku at this point would basically go home thinking that his quirk is actually pretty awesome. Deku has the innate ability to basically copy people's movements, and yeah, Taskmaster. I know Taskmaster doesn't exactly have some superpower, but I feel like it'd be way better to give Deku a quirk rather than just make him quirkless and have this ability. It's honestly the same thing. Even if he didn't have a quirk, his capabilities with the ability of mimicking people or copying people is essentially going to be the end at the same of the day. At the end of the day, not the same of the day. But that being said, this is when Deku would get into the car and he would be extremely happy thinking, "Mom, my quirk is awesome. I can copy people?" Wait, does that mean that I can copy like people with playing games and stuff? And Inko would look at Deku, she would say, "I don't know, sweetie. I guess we'll just have to find out through the years." Deku would be going home smiling, and this is when Deku would wake up the very next day as he would be going to school. This is when Deku would arrive, and Deku would actually have gotten his quirk later than everybody else. Deku would have been a little bit of a late bloomer. That being said, this is when Deku would basically start telling everybody in the class what his quirk is. And Deku would actually be getting quite a little bit of people who were like, "Yeah, his quirk's kind of cool, it's not bad." And this is when Bakugo would walk over to Deku. After he sees that Deku's getting surrounded and people are starting to like Deku's quirk, Bakugo would walk over to Deku as he would say, "That quirk of yours is nothing, Deku. My quirk would beat yours in an instant." Deku would immediately look at Bakugo and just be like, "Hey, Kachan, that's not nice. At least I have a quirk, right? You were saying that I was going to be quirkless." Bakugo would look at Deku and say, "You might as well be with a quirk like that," as he would start laughing at him, and his friends would honestly start doing the same. A bunch of the people in the class would start hopping onto Bakugo. They would start hopping on the man's, DICK, and everybody would just start being rude to Deku, to be honest. They would all follow the herd, I guess you could say. And, well, this is when Deku would go home crying. He would go to his bed, and Deku would just be upset. Deku would have his mother Inko walk into the room, and she would begin to tell Deku not to worry about it. That Bakugo doesn't get to decide how strong or weak his quirk is. He does. Deku would look at Inko and he would say, "You know what, Mom? You're right. I can make my quirk whatever I want it to be. If it's going to be weak, it's going to be because I'm weak. And I'm not going to let my quirk be determined by myself. I'm going to become better so that my quirk can get stronger. And someday I'll show Bakugo that I can be strong too." And this is when Inko would hug Izuku, and Deku would look at her as he would thank her for giving him the little speech or inspiration. As it's at this point that Deku would basically go to school. Now, this is when Deku would basically, on the first day that he returns, by the end of the day, Deku would have had a normal school day, no bullying, nothing really going on. Everybody would have honestly stopped caring about Deku, and due to the fact that he has a quirk, he's not exactly getting bullied for that reason that he got in the original. So Deku's honestly having a normal day. After school, Deku would ask his mother Inko if she can write him up for karate, and Deku would actually be put in karate. She would do that same day. On that same day, the teacher would actually ask Deku to punch like a tab, right? Like a little wooden plank. And Deku would do just that. He would, he would reel his arm back and go, ha! But the board would have no damage. This is when the sensei would say, no, you're putting the force in your fist all wrong. You're exerting far too much energy. What you need to do is this. He would show Deku, and after Deku sees it one time, he would say, I think I got it. As he would smile a little bit. He would then look at the man with the board, and the board is a very thin one at that. It's not really that hard since Deku is 6 years old. Deku would reel his arm back and put all of his force into the punch. He would go, ah, and the board would immediately break. As it's at this point that the sensei would look at Deku and be like, whoa, kid, how did you? As Deku would smile at him and Inko would say, he's pretty impressive, Maizuku. The sensei would say, when can he start? And she would say that, he can start, maybe today if he wants to. This is when the sensei would look at her and be like, yes, please start him today. Ingo would look at the sensei and be like, well, if you say so. She would say, so how much do I owe you? The sensei would look at her and be like, well, your student is going to be a great person. Your son is going to be a great student. So I'll give you a discount, 20% discount for the price that I usually give everybody else. She would smile at him, and this is when Deku would spend that entire afternoon learning the basics of karate. Punches, kicks, chops, basic stuff that his body can handle. He would, of course, not learn everything in one day. I mean, if he was like 14, he could probably do that all in one day, but Deku's body does have limitations, so he can't exactly learn everything off rip. This one, the sensei would tell Deku that, he's incredible, but one thing that he does need to know is that his body can only take him so far. His mind and, his body will know the movements, but, it doesn't mean he'll ever be able to do them perfectly if his body is not up to code. This is when Deku would hear those words and he would say, so I need to work on my body as much as I need to work on my quirk? The sensei would look at Deku and say exactly, as Deku would have of course told him his quirk is mimicry, and that's why he's so great at fighting. This is when the sensei would look at him and tell him that that's a great quirk for martial arts. He could honestly learn things very quickly, in record time even. And Deku would go to school the very next day being extremely excited, as Deku would just be happy. He would tell everybody that he learned karate, and he would begin to show people as they're like, whoa, Izuku, you're so strong. They'd start running around him. Now, this is when Deku would basically look at Bakugo, and Bakugo would say, whatever, karate is nothing when I have a powerful quirk. As he and Deku would just kind of be like, yeah, whatever. And it's at this point that they would actually go outside, as Bakugo would have just left it alone. They would go outside, and this is when they would actually play a little bit of soccer, right? They would set up, some cans and some old shoes that nobody's gonna wear, and they would set up their little goals, right? And this is when they would immediately begin to play soccer. This is when Kachan would start kicking the ball up into the air a bunch of times with his knee, and Deku would say, whoa, Kachan, that's so cool, let me try. He would throw the ball up into the air and he would start kicking it up. It would not come down. He would literally triple Bakugo's score in terms of like hitting the ball up a bunch of times. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but when you like kick it up and just keep doing that, that's basically what Deku and Bakugo were doing. This is when Bakugo would get a little angered by that, and they would then say, fine, Deku, since you're so good, how about you be on the other team? Deku would basically look at Bakugo and be like, all right, and he would end up getting one of the worst teammates possible. Deku would look at him and just say, don't worry, we got this, as he would be giving him a smile, which actually encourages the kid. And this is when Bakugo and his goons would say, all right, we get ball. Deku would say, what? And they would say fine, as they would get ball, and Deku would immediately just get scored on by Bakugo really easily too. But after Deku sees what Bakugo did, and the fact that Deku and Bakugo have like the same body build at this point, Deku would immediately be able to do everything that Bakugo just did, but better. Deku would mimic his movements, but put the karate training that he learned to use, and add more force to the kicks and more speed, as Deku would be able to pass right by Bakugo, and he would score a goal on them immediately. Bakugo would get angry and use every technique that he can think of to try to score, and Deku would go right back and do it 2 times better. Bakugo would get angry at this after about 10 minutes, and he would run at Deku as he would say, "You think you're better than me, Deku?" He would rush at him, and by the way, I'm saying it like that because, you know, they're both 6 years old. They're not going to be talking like this. Bakugo's not going to be talking like that. No, seriously, but quirkless Deku, you won't be nothing. I have a pretty, like, impression of Bakugo, but you guys shouldn't mind it too much. That being said, this is when Deku would get rushed at by Bakugo, but immediately Deku would use one of the techniques his sensei taught him. He would weave out of the way, grab Bakugo's arm, and slam him onto the ground. That's something that, while you do need force strength to be able to do, as long as, you know, they're equivalent to you, you should be able to use just enough power. And Deku would knock Bakugo onto the ground, as it's at this point that, you know, he would just be like, whoa, what just happened? After this, Bakugo would get up and shoot an explosion right at Deku's face, and he would start getting beat up by the goons. So they would actually end up jumping Deku, and Deku would run home, as he would get home pretty angry, just be like, that's not fair. Kachan totally used more people against me. It was just me. And this is when Deku would go to his karate class, as he would end up asking the sensei if there's, you know, any ways for Deku to improve his body faster. The sensei would say working out would be great and some cardio, and Deku would do just that for the next 2 weeks. The sensei would of course show Deku how to do each and every single one of the movements because, you know, Deku needs a little bit of help. That being said, after the 2 weeks are over, due to the fact that Deku did the workouts as perfectly as you can basically do them, he would watch a couple of YouTube videos on how to get the best results, and Deku would be pretty sore. But after about 2 weeks of being able to do these workouts relatively perfectly, Deku would get incredible gains from what he was doing, and Deku would actually get 4 times the gains of a normal person, due to the fact that Deku's body is actually pretty good for packing muscle. And Deku would do just that. You know, obviously he's not going to get ripped, but, you know, he got a little stronger. You know, he got pretty decently strong. He's about 2 times stronger than he was. And for a little kid, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. This is when Deku would go back to school, and this time they would be playing soccer again. As Deku would go to the field, he would say, "Hey, can I play?" Bakugo would look at him and be like, "No, you can't." And the rest of the guys would be like, "Yeah, sure." This one, Bakugo would look at his friends and be like, "He can't play." And Deku would look at Bakugo as he's just like, "Come on, Kachan." Bakugo would look at Deku and say, "Don't call me that, quirkless Deku." And Deku would just be like, "Bakugo, I'm not quirkless, remember?" Bakugo would be like, "You might as well be with that garbage quirk." Deku would then look at Bakugo and just be like, "Well, you know, you can't tell me what to do. I'm stronger than you now." After hearing that, Bakugo would get angry due to his god complex, and he would rush at Deku, to which Deku would sidestep him and punch him right in the jaw. As Bakugo would fall down to the ground, he would start bleeding and he would start crying as he runs away and just leaves the park completely. After this, Deku would immediately just be like, "Yeah, I finally did it." And Bakugo's friends would just be like, "Whoa, Deku, I didn't know you were this strong." They would immediately just look at Deku and just be like, "You're so much better than Kachan." They'd be like, "Can we be your friends? We're sorry we jumped you." Deku would be like, "Yeah, sure, don't worry about it, as long as it doesn't happen again." And this is when Deku would literally be Mr. Steal Your Friend, as he would take all of Bakugo's friends. This would basically lead to Deku continuing to get stronger and stronger, even faster than before. And 1 month would actually end up passing of Bakugo staying in his own lane and still hanging out with those 2 other kids. He would hang out with them whenever Deku wasn't there, and they would have a very weird dynamic where Bakugo just avoids Deku and is pretty angry at Deku. He's even training secretly to try to become more powerful than Deku. But due to 1 more month passing after that, Deku completing basically most of the training for karate, now all Deku pretty much needs is for his body to be able to keep up with the movements. Deku would basically spend 1 month, and after that 1 month of training with karate, he would be a perfect master at every basic move that Deku's body can let him do. It's probably going to take him another 2 years for Deku to fully be able to utilize karate at its fullest extent, but Deku is doing pretty well for where he's at now. Deku would even learn a couple of boxing techniques and even some kickboxing due to the fact that, well, he is Taskmaster. That being said, this is when Bakugo would of course challenge Deku after 1 month, and I'm just going to say it right now, he will lose even worse than before. This would lead to Deku just honestly leaving Bakugo in his dust. Deku would start getting stronger and stronger, and he would train his body to the utmost limit. This would basically start to irritate Bakugo, and after a bunch of losses to Deku, he would start losing his confidence. This would lead to Mitsuki noticing that Bakugo hasn't been the same, and she would realize that the reason that he's not so confident is because, Inko's son is so much better than than Katsuki. That basically led to Bakugo losing some confidence, and because of that, Bakugo's not the same person he once was. This would lead to her moving Bakugo from schools, and she would have Bakugo basically just not hang out with Deku. This would basically happen like that for about 4 years, and afterwards, Bakugo's father would move away from the area as they would basically end up having to leave for, a new job opportunity. That being said, after Bakugo got transferred, Deku after that would basically take Bakugo's role and would be pretty much Mr. Popular. Deku would actually be on every sports team after a certain something happened on a certain day. And we're just going to say that about 2 years would have passed, right? 2 years would have passed. And Deku is now currently 8 years old. On the day that he was 8 years old, he was walking by the park and he was basically just watching some kids play basketball. As Deku was asked if he wanted to play, he would join, and at first he was pretty bad, but after watching the kids play for a little bit, Deku was able to copy what they were doing and would even do it even better than they did. That would lead to them asking what school he plays for, and Deku would, after being asked that, he would say that he doesn't play for any school. They would say that he definitely should and that it would be so much fun to play against him in a tournament or something. And Deku would the very next day go to class, as he would just be in gym class. They would be playing some basketball and Deku would school everybody, leading to the coach just being like, bro, I need you on my team. What is it going to cost? Deku would be like, nothing. And this is when Deku would join the basketball team. This would lead to him going back to PE class, and when they run track, Deku would obliterate that too, which would lead to the track coach wanting Deku, and this would honestly just continue. It would be a cycle to which Deku basically ends up joining each and every single sports team. Deku would be goated, and because I like basketball, I'm going to cover the finals for the basketball team next year. Deku will now be 9 years old, and their team would actually be up 79-43. Deku's defense and offense was just too crazy, and the finishing game shot, Deku would have literally went to the right, between the legs, behind the back, spin move, and faded away in a kid's face, as that kid broke his ankles. Yeah, that man literally fell on his, he fell on his ASS, and that man was done for. That being said, Deku smiled at him and he basically walked over him afterwards, Allen Iverson, as Deku basically proceeded to master every single sport you can basically think of. And by the time that he is 16, the time of the anime, Deku is he's pretty much in every school sports team, which would have led to Deku not even attending any of the practices, but more or less just kind of being there at the games. Deku doesn't even need the practices. He can just watch people, and if they start beating him, Deku can copy them and just start being better than them, Deku is just a master at this point. And now that he is 16, not only is he good at sports, but Deku is a master at every single form of combat that Deku has tried to learn. Deku is a master at boxing, kickboxing, judo, taijutsu, jujitsu. I don't know, man. I don't really know how to fight like that. Deku's just really good at fighting, all right? Deku's, I'd say, about as good as Taskmaster is. Just not half as strong, since Taskmaster does have more experience and is more physically adept at his powers. That being said, this would basically lead to Deku being built pretty much like a Greek god. And Deku... Oh, wait, no, I said 16. No, Deku is 15 at this point, right? Because of 10 months, that's when he's going to turn 16. Yeah. Anyways, now we are going to be skipping to the day of the sludge villain, but we're not going to be the only one skipping. Deku is actually skipping that entire day of school to do a little bit of outdoor parkour. The weather was nice that day, and Deku decided it would be a little bit of fun. So, that being said, Deku would be jumping across building to building, just not even going to class in his uniform, as Deku would, as he's running, he would notice that a green sludge just came out of the sewer. Deku would stop to take a look at that thing, and this is when Deku would jump down from the building, as he would notice what that is. He would get closer and be like, what is that? As immediately more of it would come out, and the sludge villain would then attack Deku, as it would say, give me your body, kid. Deku would look at it as he would say, "No, get away from me." And Deku would then literally just try to punch that thing away. But the sludge villain would grab onto Deku and it would start suffocating him. Deku would start trying to grab at the sludge villain and get out, but Deku simply can't. He can't even hurt the sludge villain. Deku would try to hit the sludge villain in the eye, but it would just move the location of them, and Deku would not be able to do a thing to it. And let's just say Deku gets done pretty dirty. He has no real weapons to help him out with the sludge villain, and he has nothing but his hands. So Deku's gonna almost, lose his life. He almost gonna perish if it wasn't for All Might, as All Might would jump out and be like, "I am here." As he'd basically talk to All Might, and All Might would ask him if he's okay. Deku would say he is. He would get an autograph, and All Might would of course jump off. In this version, All Might is not going to be dropping the sludge villain, and Deku is not. I repeat, he is not going to be getting one for all, because it's not what if Deku was Taskmaster and got one for all. I'm trying to go through more of just his quirk. He just wants to make that powerful type of route instead of what if Deku was Taskmaster and was broken. So yeah. That being said though, after Deku realized that he was kind of useless in terms of dealing with the villain like that, Deku would realize that he definitely is going to be needing a lot of gadgets if he's going to want to survive in the hero world. If he was to ever have to fight against somebody on the level of All Might, Deku would wholeheartedly get stomped. Deku would get crushed if he was to ever have to fight against somebody like All Might. Probably not like if it was him specifically, because All Might wouldn't be able to hit Deku, but All Might is just too strong to hurt. And Deku's just normal hand-to-hand combat won't do. Deku only has a mastery over shield, the sword, bow staff, and arrows and stuff like that. But Deku doesn't have a mastery over more lethal weapons, I guess you could say. So after Deku basically realizes, he would end up realizing that what he needs are gadgets, and that is what Deku would spend the 10 months training. During those 10 months, Deku would of course train on those couple of things, and Deku would basically learn how to use weaponry, such as enhanced guns, like things that can shoot at literal lasers and stuff like that. Deku's not going to be playing with none of these plastic bullets, none of that. Deku is going to be using some real weapons, This is basically what Deku would be doing, apart from going out with a bunch of girls, because Deku, as I said, he's on every sports team. He's literally Mr. Popular, and Deku, whenever he's not training or working out, is pretty much going out with another girl every other month or week, depending on what Deku feels like. That being said, I'm going to be skipping over to the day of the entrance exam, and Deku would end up putting in 2 weapons for him to use. He would be using number 1, a shield, and a bow staff. Those are the 2 weapons that Deku is basically going to be taking into the UA Sports Festival. That being said, Deku would of course go into this school. He would realize how beautiful the school truly looks, and he would of course go inside. There is going to be 0 interaction with Uraraka in this version, because Uraraka is not going to trip, and Deku is most definitely not going to trip, because even if he did, he would of course catch himself. But honestly, I see no way for Deku to fall for no reason, since he's not even nervous. And with that being said, Deku would go inside, and let's just say he does not even need to study, bro. Deku's a genius. Like, obviously he's not on the level of Nezu, or he's not going to get like a 100%, but Deku's going to get at least a 90 on the test. Deku is not no slouch when it comes to intellect. Deku is extremely intelligent, and so is Taskmaster, so Deku definitely has to be. By the way, guys, comment your opinion on what you guys thought of the Taskmaster in the Black Widow movie. Honestly, I feel like the character of Taskmaster wasn't really handled that well. I mean, the fact that it turned out to be his daughter, and like the fact that it was a girl, I don't really care about that, but I don't know, something about the storyline and like just the way that like Taskmaster was used in the Black Widow movie just felt like complete injustice towards what Taskmaster really is. I mean, I feel like Taskmaster could have beaten Black Widow in the first fight, and they just did the man dirty, honestly. Like, Taskmaster is not some lapdog who just listens completely to what somebody says. That is absolutely not what Taskmaster is, and that's just my personal take on the movie. But let me know what yours is. That being said, Deku would of course go outside to the physical portion of the quirk exam, or the test for the UA entrance exams, and Deku would be out there as Deku just has a hoodie, some jeans, and some track shoes, as Deku's honestly just ready. Deku even has a shield in hand and the staff, As Deku's standing at the door, this is when Deku would look around and just notice that nobody's telling them to go. And this is when Deku would do some critical thinking and be like, but heroes are never told when to go. I doubt I'll get in trouble for this. Deku would use his bow staff to pretty much lunge up into the air as if it was a pogo stick, and Deku would literally jump over the UA gate as immediately off rip Deku would start smashing robots left and right. Deku is a normal human even if he is extremely powerful. So by the first robot that he sees, Deku would lunge at it as he would smack the bow staff and hit the robot, blowing the robot's head clean off. This would lead to Deku running on top of the robot, and he would immediately jump down onto another one as he would hit the robot with the shield, rip off one of its arms and shove it into another one, as that's 3 easy robot points. Deku would basically continue to do this back and forth until he gets so many points that it's not even funny how many he gets. And Deku would do great things in the quirk entrance exam. Why do I keep saying that? In the entrance exam, right? He would do great things. That being said, this would basically lead to Deku just getting about, let's see, 112 points. 112 points, all right? That's reasonable. If Deku's just going to be going on a rampage, 112 points should be attainable, right? That being said, Deku would be pretty tired by this point, and this is when he would basically hear the ground rumble. As many people would start running away, Deku would notice Uraraka off in the distance, and Deku would immediately rush at her direction. His body would move. He would have told himself to just leave her there, but his body just went on his own, and Deku would rush at Uraraka. He would throw the rubble off of her, pick her up with his arms, and just rush. Like, he would get out of there immediately. Deku is pretty buff, to say the least, so him carrying Uraraka is nothing at all, and Deku would run full speed. He would haul ass out of there, as Deku would basically end up saving Uraraka, take her to Recovery Girl, and Deku would pretty much, just dip out of there. He's just like, yeah, I have nothing really else to do here. Okay, so on the last part, I left off with Deku being like, I wonder how many likes Zethers gonna have to make them get before they can get part 2. Oh well, might as well go home now. As Deku would basically start going home. This is when Deku would arrive home, and honestly, he would just get some dinner, which Minko makes, and he would then pass out. This is when Deku would then spend the next couple of days basically just waiting for his entrance letter, seeing as the man knows, like, he knows he got into UA. He saw the way that the other kids were fighting with some of them having some flashy quirks, and some of them looking like they're definitely not getting into UA. Deku could immediately tell, off rip, that man was getting into UA because he's a bad man. That man, Deku, that man's strong, to say the least. That being said, Deku honestly is just going to be chilling for the week. However, the day before school is when he and Inko decide to go off to celebrate. This is when Deku would basically be with Inko on the mall, and she would basically tell him to hold on right next to a little bit of a weird little mini game in the mall. She would say that she's gonna go into the store and go buy some things. And also, one more thing to add, Inko never got chubby in this version, cause Deku never was quirkless, so she never fell into some sadness, and that never forced her to eat out of, depression or whatever it was that made her be fat. That being said, this is when Deku was honestly just chilling there, and he's on his phone. He's just scrolling through Instagram until he turns around. He has a guy call him. He's like, "Hey, you want to try this game out?" He's like, "You look pretty fit." Deku would turn towards his direction and be like, "Huh?" As he'd be like, "What is this?" As he'd read the rules, it says, "Hang for 2 minutes, win $100. You have to pay $10 to do it." Deku would be like, whatever, I might as well. This is when he would basically just give him the $10, and Deku would hang, as the guy would start turning the timer, and Deku would have already gotten to about 1 minute. At this point, he'd be like, "This guy's gonna do it," as a bunch of people would start to surround him. This is when a group of just high schoolers and a group of seniors would pull up, right? A bunch of high school seniors would pull up from quirks. They're from hero schools, right? And they would then look at Deku as they're like, hey, watch this. One of them goes up to Deku and literally just pushes him off. As Deku, before he can even fall, he catches himself with the bar with one arm, throws himself back up there, and hangs on for the next 30 seconds, causing Deku to win the $100. This is when Deku would get handed a $100 bill, and Deku would then look at the kid who did that to him, who was just standing there like, "Hey, dude, I'm sorry." As Deku would look at him and be like, "Oh, sorry, all right." This is when Deku would punch him straight in the jaw, and the kid, his jaw would have gotten dislocated. This is when Deku would punch him in the nose, and the kid would fall onto his ass. As immediately the other kids are like, hey, as they would rush at him. One of them would have a fire quirk, the other one has an ice quirk, and one of them has a little bit of a wind quirk. They would all rush at him, and they all have flashy quirks, and they would shoot their attacks all at once, which would cause them to all disperse, seeing as they're all kind of opposites to each other. That being said, Deku would smirk, and this is when he would immediately rush at them, as he would do an immediate takedown. He would jump up into the air as he punches one of them right on the side of the head, knocking him out, and he kicks one of them square in the stomach, just forcing him to lose his air. As this is when Deku would jump off of the other one, and he would legit bash one of the kids' heads into the ground. As it's at this point that Deku just stands there and gets into his fighting stance, as he looks at them and spits on one of the kids, and he then walks over to his mom. This one, Inko would be like, Izuku, let's go. As Deku would be like, all right, mom, let's go. And a bunch of people would have actually been recording what happened. This is when Deku would basically just go to school the very next day. And this is when immediately, as soon as he walks inside, Deku is told immediately by the people who are in the class, they're like, dude, were you the kid who fought the other day? Deku would be like, yeah, why? What are you talking about? As they'd be like, dude, you're viral. Deku would look at the video, and he would then be like, I should have been like, yeah, don't post that, but I didn't say anything. All right, well, yeah, that's me. Those guys started it. As they'd be like, what do you mean they started it? What happened? Deku would explain what happened, and they would be like, oh, makes sense, but, you know, don't you think you went a little overboard? Deku would say that he would have never had to done anything if they would have never acted the way they did. And this is when Katsuki, or Bakugo, would pull up behind Deku, and he'd be like, hey, Deku. This is when Deku would turn around and see a very familiar face. Immediately, Deku would smile, and his face would light up, as he would be like, Kachan? As Bakugo would look at Deku, we'd get like a little bit of a cringy face, as he would look at him and be like, huh, yeah, that's me, Deku. What's up? This is when Deku would look at Bakugo and be like, dude, it's been forever. How have you been? Deku would go up to Bakugo and dab him up, as Bakugo's like, I've been good, you know, I've just been chilling, getting a lot stronger than you. As Deku would look at Bakugo and immediately just be like, oh, he think he's stronger? This is when Bakugo would be like, yeah, so you better have been training, or else I'm gonna leave you in the dust. As Deku would just look at him and start chuckling. This one, before Deku could even give off a cocky remark, Aizawa would get up from the desk, as he would be like, alright guys, it took you guys 8 seconds to be quiet. Meet me outside and throw these on. Uraraka would be like, but what about orientation? As Aizawa would be like, we don't have time for orientation. We have 3 years to mold you into perfect heroes. As they all just go into the changing room, and everybody would see Deku's physique. Yeah. Deku Deku would get ripped, and like Kirishima, noticing how like just the build that Deku has, is just like, dude, you're a Greek god, like, bro, like, how did you get so buff? Deku would say he just works out, and Kirishima would be like, dude, we gotta go to the gym sometime. As Deku would be like, sure thing, I'm down. As this is when they would all go outside. Aizawa would immediately look towards Deku's direction and throw the ball at him, as Deku would be like, what's this for? Aizawa would then look at Deku and say, alright kid, you gotta throw that ball as hard as you can. I'm gonna be showing you your score on this little device that is a tracker on the ball. Just throw whenever you're ready. As long as you stay in the circle, it'll count. Deku would look at Aizawa and just be like, alright, so I just gotta throw it? And Aizawa would be like, cha-ching. As Deku would be like, alright, this seems simple enough. Deku would reel his arm back and throw it for about 400 meters. And everybody would just have their jaws drop. They would be like, this kid is inhumane. As Deku just chuckles and like kind of like rubs his arms. He starts spinning it, and he starts popping it back into place, because he kind of dislocated it to throw it that far. As Deku would pop it back, he would then be like, ah. And then he would then look at Aizawa as he says, that good? As everybody would get excited and be like, dude, do you have some sort of super strength quirk? Deku would say that that's not it at all. He would say that he just has a copy quirk. And they would say, oh, so you copied someone's strength. Deku would say, I can copy movements, not quirks. As they would be like, that's it? They'd be like, it's not that flashy, but I mean, if you threw it that far, then I mean, I'm just gonna take your word for it. You definitely belong here. This one, they would have the rest of the exams, and Deku would get first place, with Bakugo coming in at third. due to the fact that Bakugo got clapped up by Deku a whole lot when he was growing up. Bakugo definitely realized that there's always going to be someone stronger than him out there. So this version of Bakugo doesn't exactly just be like, oh, all right, I'm going to be better than everybody and there's nothing anyone can do about it. No, that doesn't happen whatsoever. Bakugo instead, he realizes, yep, some people are going to be better than me. I just got to live with that. And he just has to train a lot harder if he wants to keep up. That being said, Bakugo trained a lot harder than the original, 3 times actually, which would lead to Bakugo getting 3rd place in the Quirk exam. However, this is when we are now going to be talking about Deku walking up to Bakugo and be like, so what was that you were saying about being stronger than me? Bakugo would be like, and he would just kind of just be like, whatever. As he would walk away, this is when Bakugo would just be like, if we ever get the chance to fight here, I'm going to put you in the dust, Deku. It's not the same as when we were kids, you know. I've had time to train. Deku would look at Bakugo and be like, so have I. It's not like you're the only one that got stronger. As Bakugo would grit his teeth, he would then walk away and remember all the anger that he had towards Deku. As it's at this point that Deku just chuckles, and Deku will then go to leave as someone actually stops him. This would actually be Mina. She would ask Deku what his quirk is and how she's interested in it. And Deku would begin to explain, as Deku knows exactly that he knows exactly what she's really interested in. She's interested in, and Deku is interested in providing that. That being said, Deku would look at Mina as he's like, so enough small talk. You want to go to my place? As Mina would be like, oh, fast, I see. And she'd be like, sure thing. As this is when Deku and Mina would be talking as they're on their way home or to Deku's house, seeing as, you know, Inko's at work right now. She doesn't get out until like 8, and it's about like 5 o'clock right now. So they would arrive and Deku gives her the work for 2 hours. You know, they're doing biology, whole lot of that, and multiplication, addition. They subtracted the clothes, they added the bed, and all that stuff. Anyways, that being said, this is when Deku would basically go to school the very next day. As he would enter class, he would put his stuff down and Deku would just push his hair back. As he puts it in, like, he has it like in a sort of comb over type of way where it kind of just is like thrown to the back of his head. And Deku has like his hair kind of slicked back ish, I guess you could say, but it looks clean. Like, he doesn't put gel in it. It just sits like that and it looks clean. Deku has like some long hair in this version and it's pretty fire to say the least. That being said, think the Winter Soldier, but like no think, if you guys have seen Cobra Kai, think sort of Robbie, but like a little messier and not as much like that, but more as in like a I don't care type attitude. He would walk in and this one Mina would sit on Deku's desk and she'd be like, so we had a great time yesterday, right? Deku would look at Mina and be like, we didn't do anything last night. He would literally just act as if he doesn't know her, and Mina would be like, what? And Deku would just be like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Deku would legit play it off as if nothing happened, and Mina would be like, just try to slap him, but Deku would catch her hand and be like, yeah, get out of here. As Mina would leave and she would get kind of angry by that, but Deku would just smirk at her as he just blows her a kiss. Mina looks at him and doesn't know whether to get angry or smile, but she would smile and Deku would just be like, round 2. She looks at him, and even though she's kind of mad that he just blew her off and acted as if they were nothing in front of the class, he's still gonna give her the work later. That being said, Mina would go, and this is when they would go through class. As well, the final class would arrive, and All Might would bust in the door saying, I am here. As he would be like, I'm walking through the door like a normal person. Everybody would be like, it's All Might. And this is when Deku would just be sitting in the back of the class chilling, as he's like, looks like All Might is going to work here after all. He would have heard some news about that. Deku at this point would have been like, pretty great things, huh? As he would then look at All Might and say, hey, All Might, can I talk to you for a second? All Might would go over to Deku and he'd just say, hey, All Might, I just wanted to say thank you for opening my eyes to my weakness back then, about 10 months ago. As All Might would be like, oh yeah, you're that kid who I saw and saved the other day, right? And Deku would be like, yeah, but trust me, I won't be needing saving anymore. As All Might would smile, he'd be like, that's great, young man. This is when he would say, well, all of you need to suit up because the clothes make the pros, and we're going to be having a little bit of a training exercise. As they would all end up going to suit up, Deku's costume is going to be the Taskmaster outfit that you guys see on screen. It's going to be the MCU version, but trust me, Deku's going to have a whole lot of personality. He ain't going to be like the normal, Taskmaster in the movie who was just so dead and dry. And it was just like, mind-controlled goon. That's definitely not what Deku's going to be. That being said, Deku would basically end up going outside. As the people would look at him, Bakugo would be like, huh, you look more like a villain than a hero in that thing. And Deku would look at Bakugo as he's like, yeah, I was talking about, speaking of looking like a villain, Mr. Terrorist over here, better calm down. As Bakugo would be like, this is when Deku would look at him and chuckle and be like, dude, I'm just playing, calm down. This is when he would say, you look like such a little angry Pomeranian. As Bakugo would just be like, how dare you. This is when Deku would just be like, whatever. Now he walks over to the back, and this is when Alma would begin to save the team. This Deku is just honestly being really cocky right now. He has a sort of he has one weapon. That's what Deku has. He has one weapon, which literally has a bunch of modes. And it legit comes with almost limitless ammo. So Deku will never have to worry about running out of ammo or anything. Deku quite literally has a weapon which can transform into different weapons. So if he wants, he can create a scythe, a hammer, an axe, a saw, a chainsaw. He can create any type of gun, snipers, anything that you guys can think of, Deku can basically do. And that being said, this is when Deku would just throw the weapon on his back as he's with Uraraka versus Bakugo and Ida. And Deku would walk by Bakugo as he looks at him and nods his head. Bakugo would look at Deku as he knows Deku's just grinning under that mask. And it's at this point that Deku would go inside as he tells Uraraka that she's going to be the one who finds the bomb room, but he's going to be taking care of both of them. That's all she needs to do. Uraraka would be like, wait, but isn't this a team exercise? And Deku looks at her as he says, trust me, I'll do this way better than if we work as a team. As she would say, okay. And Deku would then look at her, so he'd be like, come on, go do your job. Uraraka would then proceed to go over there, and she'd be like, that guy was weird. As this is when Deku would just be like, I guess this doesn't really work on every girl. And Deku would then basically just sit there down there as he legit sits down and just like puts in some earbuds. As his helmet, it can legit put on music for him. Deku would put on some music and then you would just hear, oh. Many of you guys are probably like, what is this? What's going on? And I'm sorry that I just may have potentially destroyed your ears. You know, maybe I'd gave you a brain cancer after doing that, but I do apologize. That being said, though, this is when I am now going to be basically covering the fight between Deku and Bakugo. This is when Bakugo would jump down and he'd be like, "Oi, Deku, let's go." As he would rush at Deku, he would then say, "I'm gonna beat you this time." As he would blast an explosion at Deku's direction, Deku would catch his arm, and before he even got the chance to slam him on his back, Bakugo would propel himself away from him. As Deku's like, you have a pretty unorthodox fighting style. Deku would say, "I like that." As it's at this point that Deku would turn in the same way that Bakugo did, and they would both be looking at each other head to head. Deku would throw a punch and Bakugo would throw an explosion, blinding Deku, but seeing as Deku has the mask on, he can turn on thermal vision. Deku would do just that, and he would then rush at Bakugo as he jumps off the wall and punches Bakugo square in the jaw, just sending him crashing over there to the wall. Bakugo would then shoot an explosion, blowing himself up. And it's at this point that he would literally bust through the other rooms as they would go to a different room to continue the fight. Deku would rush at Bakugo and throw a bunch of kicks. As Deku would then do a backflip as he kicks Bakugo into the air, Deku would then basically take out the weapon. As out of nowhere, he would turn it into two Nightwing looking sticks. He would then slash them together, and they would then immediately start sparking with electricity. As he would smash them onto the ground, Bakugo would be like, "What?" As he would jump up, dodging the electricity. But this is when Deku knew what he was doing. He would rush at Bakugo and go in for a kick as Bakugo moved, but Deku expected it, and mid-air Deku switched his direction, grabbed Bakugo by the head, and slammed him into one of the walls. As Bakugo got hit on that, Bakugo would immediately turn towards Deku, but before Bakugo could even get up, Deku would kick Bakugo square in the head, sending him crashing back into the wall. And this is when Bakugo will then start thinking that maybe there's one way to win. If he starts faking it and he hits him with the explosion gauntlets, Bakugo would then start being like, "How'd you get so strong?" As Deku would start, going into, he's like, "You know what? I guess I'll let me monologue." Deku would begin to talk about how he trained for so many years, and Bakugo would then be like, "Perfect." But right as Bakugo lifted his arm to shoot the explosion at Deku would transform the sticks into one a pistol, and he would blast it, just destroying the gauntlet. And the other one, Deku would just kick it, breaking it on impact. Deku would then look at Bakugo, pick him up by the shirt with one arm, stare him down right in the eyes and say, you know, Bakugo, even though you have that flashy quirk, anything you can do, I'll always do better. As he would then slam him into the wall, knock Bakugo out, and Deku would then just create a rocket launcher. Which you blast it up to the sky, and it would just cause Deku to jump up and like basically do some gymnastic type stuff as he would get over there to the bomb room. And Ida and Uraraka would both corner Ida, as Ida would be like, huh, how are you able to? But before Ida could even react, Deku would literally copy one of Ida's kicks. He would smash his foot right into Ida's skull, cracking it. Ida would bleed, and immediately Uraraka would touch the bomb, as they would have ended up winning fairly easily. Deku honestly probably shouldn't have done all that stuff, but I mean, what are you gonna do? Deku is Deku at the end of the day. That being said though, guys, this is where I'm going to be leaving off the second part for what if Deku was Taskmaster. Okay, so I know I said that I was going to be giving a little bit of a mini intro before this part started. However, I honestly got a little bit lazy, therefore probably not going to be doing that anymore. That being said, let's get into today's story. So we pick up our story with Bakugo basically waking up angry at the fact that he can't beat Izuku. This moment, Bakugo would barely be waking up in Recovery Girl's office, and Bakugo would just be like, what happened? This is when Bakugo would be shown footage of what happened exactly. And Bakugo's eyes would just widen as he remembers the final words Deku said to him before he finally knocked him out. Deku told him, you were never able to beat me before, and you're not going to be able to beat me now. As he literally proceeded to knock him out, and yeah, Bakugo would literally just sit there and think that same thought in his head. He couldn't beat him then, and he can't beat him now. No matter how hard he trained, no matter how much blood, sweat, and tears he put in, he never got stronger than Deku. Deku just always kept evolving, getting more powerful, while Bakugo just stayed progressively getting slower. And this realization would truly hit Bakugo. This is when Bakugo would go home extremely angry, and he would decide that he needs to let out some anger. So he would go to the gym, and he would start working out. This is when we're going to switch over to Deku's point of view, and Deku would literally just put all of his stuff down. He would put his backpack to the side, take a shower, and he would start watching some YouTube video. He would get in his laptop and be like, huh, Zedder just posted a new video? Crazy. What if Naruto was a Saiyan part 3? What? Make sure you guys go check it out, you know. Do your boy a favor. That being said, enough fourth wall breaking. Zedder would literally, no, not Zedder, but Deku would literally proceed to, I'm really about to try to tell a story about myself. Anyways, Deku would basically just relax that entire day, and this is when we're basically just going to have about 1 week of normal school activities. There's literally going to be nothing going on up until the day of the USJ. See, this is when we are now going to finally start covering some of the juicier stuff. Of course, the students would all be on the bus, and Suyu would be talking about who she thinks is the strongest. Of course, since Deku, his quirk isn't that flashy, and Suyu is kind of on the very bold side, I think Suyu's the type of person who would be like, Ribbit, Todoroki's the best. I hate Suyu's voice. I don't know what it is. I don't like Suyu's voice. Some Suyu tards are probably down there just like, what do you mean you don't like Suyu's voice? Kill yourself. Do us all a favor. And I'm just going to be here like, hey, bro, chill. But anyways, that being said, this is when, the USJ would arrive. They would all be on the bus. Todoroki would be kind of smirking at the fact that they're saying he's the strongest. And Deku would honestly not even care. He wouldn't even pay any mind to it. He's just like, whatever. They think Todoroki's stronger. I guess I'll just have to show him some other time. As Deku's just in the back, honestly chilling. There's really nothing to go on right now. This one, they would all basically go inside, and 13 would give her annoying speech. Your powers can be used for good, but they can also be used for bad. Bro, they know this stuff already. Anyways, That being said, this is when Kurogiri would arrive. However, before Kurogiri even had the chance to shoot to take the to teleport the kids away, Deku would have immediately taken out his weapon, turned it into a minigun, and just started blasting at Kurogiri, stopping him from teleporting any of the students away. And this is when Kirishima would jump after Kurogiri, as he would miraculously, by luck actually, end up hitting Kurogiri's metal part. This is when he would hold him down. And it's at this point that Deku would look at Aizawa. Aizawa would give him a look of no. And Deku would literally turn his gun into a bow staff as he would jump down into the area with all the villains. And he would start to beat asses. Like, this man Deku would start going hard. It's at this point that Deku would literally do these men very dirty. And Deku would proceed to obliterate all these people. It's at this point that Deku, after obliterating each and every single one of the people, more of the villains, which were on different sections that didn't have anybody teleported to them, started to arrive. And this would lead to them actually starting to swarm Deku. This is when Deku would realize that he needs to have a different approach to this, as Deku would have his gun turn into a stun gun, and it would literally just blast at all the villains, as they would all get knocked out one by one, but the process is pretty slow. One of the villains would have actually gotten behind Deku and actually hit him, and this would lead to Aizawa being like jumping down there and helping Deku. This is when Deku would be like, get back here, this is not your time. As it's at this point that, Deku would be like, what do you mean get back here? You don't get to decide that. Of course, Aizawa was just like, I'm your teacher, I can decide that. As he just punches some guy square in the nose, the guy would fall down bleeding. And it's at this point that, well, Shigaraki would start scratching his neck saying, they're cheating, as he looks at the Nomu and says, Nomu, kill that brat. It's at this point that the Nomu would literally rush at Deku. However, before the Nomu got the chance to even jump on Deku, Deku would literally grab Aizawa's scarf, be like, thanks, as he would wrap it around the Nomu's arm and use some gymnast type move to wrap around the Nomu's neck, as Deku would proceed to use Aizawa's scarf perfectly. Matter of fact, he would use his scarf techniques even better than Aizawa. And it's at this point that he would actually be able to restrain the Nomu for just enough time for Deku to turn his staff into a literal scythe. He would literally use that scythe to proceed to chop that Nomu's head off. And it's at this point that Deku would turn towards Shigaraki's direction. However, Deku is not fast enough to get to Shigaraki, so this would lead to Kurogiri barely escaping from Kirishima, teleporting Shigaraki away, and right as Shigaraki gets dropped off at the bar, he would look towards Kurogiri's direction and say, did you see the blonde boy? As Kurogiri would be like, I did, sir. As Shigaraki would say, bring me him. This is when Kurogiri would teleport back after the heroes thought everything was over, grab Bakugo with nobody looking, and teleport him away. As everybody except for Deku would have been oblivious to what just happened. Deku would have watched as Bakugo was taken away by Kurogiri. And as soon as he got back, Kurogiri immediately knocked Bakugo out. And Shigaraki would be looking at Bakugo as he says, the kid has potential. We need to groom him to become a villain. As Kurogiri would be like, yes, sir. It's at this point that he would talk to All For One, and All For One would get some stuff arranged. It's at this point that, of course, they would realize his potential, and this is when Bakugo would finally wake up. However, when he does, he would get knocked out by Mr. Compress, who had just arrived. And this would lead to finally us cutting back to the hero side. At this point, All Might got there and basically got the bad news of Bakugo's disappearance. This would lead to the heroes essentially starting to look for Bakugo, and this is when they would basically hold a conference meeting with everything that's essentially going down happening. And it would basically go on record or statements that Aizawa was the one that did all the saving and all the fighting against the villains, even though it was Deku, just due to the fact that not only did a student get kidnapped, but if they were to find out that a student was the one who saved them all, UA would have definitely gone under. So they would have asked the students to keep that under wraps. This is when, while all of that is happening, Bakugo would wake up once again in a dark, dimly lit room, as he would see a giant chair. This is when Bakugo would look at that direction and say, where am I? He would look towards All For One's direction and he would say, who the hell are you? As All For One would look towards Bakugo and say, my name is All For One. This is when Bakugo would say, kind of horrible name is that? Let me go, or else I'll send you 6 feet under. As All For One would start chuckling, he would clap. He would say, you know, kid, for somebody who's aspiring to be a hero, you sure have some villain tendencies. Bakugo would look at him and say, what the hell do you know? As All For One would say, oh, I know a lot. And this is when he would turn towards his direction and say, I know that there's a kid who's been giving you a lot of trouble, but if you join me, I can grant you power, unfathomable power, which you will finally be able to use to defeat that pain in the side. Because trust me, kid, I know about pains. All Might, he's been a pain on my side for years. I think it's time I help you take yours down, if you can help me take mine. Bakugo's eyes would light up as he would look towards All For One's direction and say, I can't even take out that kid who might as well be quirkless, and you expect me to help you take down the symbol of peace? Not happening. You might as well just kill me now, because there's nothing I'll be able to do. This one All For One would look at him and say, but you will. As he would put his hand over Bakugo's face, he would immediately start screaming as All For One would charge in 2 brand new quirks. One by the name of Double Impact, and the other a Danger Sense quirk. Not exactly as good as the one that Deku has in the manga, however, it is very, very strong and potent at that. He has the ability to basically dodge attacks, which he would have never been able to dodge before, but it's not as refined as Deku's Danger Sense. It's about as strong as the original Danger Sense without One For All powering it up. That being said, after realizing what All For One had done, Bakugo would immediately change his mind and join the villain. As it's at this point that Mitsuki, she would be angry, searching for her son, yelling at UA, just like going totally haywire. And it's at this point that Deku would be upset. We now switch back over to our main character's perspective, and Deku would be upset, thinking that if he was only a bit stronger, he might have been able to grab Shigaraki and bargain for Bakugo. But he was too slow. It's after this point that school would basically be closed down, and it would be closed for about 1 month entirely. The festival would get pushed back, and this would mean that Bakugo has exactly 1 month that he's been training with the villains. So Bakugo got exponentially stronger. All For One trained Shigaraki by throwing him with Gigantomachia, and he got so much improvement from that. Now imagine what Bakugo can do with his already incredible talent, his fighting prowess, the fact that he doesn't have anything holding him back, and the fact that he now has 2 brand new quirks. Yeah, Bakugo is definitely going to grow a lot more than any of you guys could ever imagine. That being said, this is when he basically starts asking around. Or no, not Bakugo, but Deku. See, after the 1 month, the UA Sports Festival finally would arrive. However, the day of the sports festival, Deku wouldn't show up. For the past month, Deku has been asking around, using his intelligence and tech to track down Bakugo. Until finally, on the day of the UA Sports Festival, Deku found a location. He immediately got his stuff, and instead of reporting to the actual place, he would go to the sports festival. Where this is when Deku would finally be able to track down Bakugo back to that bar. Back to that place where Deku needs to pull Bakugo out of. Because they may not see eye to eye, but Deku's not going to let Bakugo down. He may have caused a lot of things to happen when they were kids. And yeah, Bakugo may have bullied him, but he doesn't deserve to die. Not like this. If Bakugo goes down, he's going to go down fighting. And oh, Deku, you have no idea how right you are. That being said, this is when Deku would arrive at the bar. As he would open one of the windows in the back, this is when Deku would throw his shield full force at Kurogiri's direction, knocking Kurogiri to the ground and out cold. As it is this point that Deku would jump down and create a katana as he would slice off Shigaraki's arms. It's at this point that Shigaraki would look at his arms as they would pour out, and Deku would just kick Shigaraki into the wall. As Shigaraki would drop and he would pass out due to, blood loss. It's at this point that Bakugo would turn the corner as he's wiping sweat off of himself with the towel. And Deku would look at him as he would say, Bakugo? No, he would say, Kachan, let's go. This one Bakugo would look towards Deku and say, Deku, I was wondering when you would arrive. As Deku would look at Bakugo and say, what are you talking about? Deku would look at Bakugo and say, come on, we gotta go. There's not a lot of time. My memory's telling me that someone should arrive very shortly. Let's go. Bakugo would look at Deku, and as Deku grabs his arm, Bakugo would shoot a full power explosion right at Deku's face, as Deku would get blown back. However, the second he hits the ground, another explosion would go off right in Deku's face with twice the power, as that explosion would do 2 times the damage, and Deku would get extremely weakened after that. And to this point that Deku would say, "Why, Bakugo?" As Bakugo would look at Deku and say, "You've embarrassed me since we were kids. You embarrassed me the other day, and I've been living with that for years. Now, you're gonna know what it feels like to feel a fate worse than death." As Bakugo would rush at Deku, he'd pick him up with both arms and throw him at one of the walls. As Deku would barely catch himself before taking the full force of the impact, Deku would turn his gun into a small knife, and he would rush at Bakugo, as Bakugo would throw explosions at Deku, which he would dodge, but the second impact would always catch Deku off guard. This is when Deku would basically activate one of the features on his suits, which can basically let him see into the future a tiny bit. He has his own little version of danger sense within his suit, something that's even more potent than Bakugo's. As it's at this point that Deku would say something that would definitely lean towards Bakugo's pride. He would say, "Look, Bakugo, you may be strong, but without those quirks, you'd be nothing." As Bakugo would hear that, he'd say, "I don't need a quirk to beat you." It's immediately when Bakugo would stop using them, Deku would take advantage of this and land multiple blows on Deku. As they would both be going basically blow to blow, Deku would be having the upper hand the entire time. It's kind of like Black Widow versus Taskmaster when they first encountered each other, where she was just taking a fat L, except imagine the L multiplied by 4. That's what happening to Bakugo. However, this one Bakugo would actually use one of his gauntlets as he blasted straight at Deku and shoots one of his own explosions, plus double impact, causing Deku to crash straight into the wall and fall onto his knees as Deku would say, "What, Bakugo?" This one All For One would come into the room just barely as he gets to see the finale. As All For One would see what had just happened, Bakugo standing over Deku as he would say, "You know, Deku, I've been waiting a long time for this." He would look at Deku, pick him up by the hair, and then say, "No matter what you do, I was always destined to be greater. From the moment I got my quirk, and the second you got yours was just the day you died." As he would drop Deku, spit on his face, he would then turn towards All For One as he would say, "Stop. We need to end him now." As Bakugo would look at All For One, he would then say, "No, you leave him alone. He's mine. And you know what? There's some fates far worse than death." As All For One would look at him, smile under the mask, he would then go over to Shigaraki as he would steal the quirk, and after this, they would leave. Okay, boys, so we pick up our story basically where we had left off in the last part. Bakugo had just told Deku that there's some fates far worse than death, and Deku would have passed out into unconsciousness. It's at this point that a couple of hours later, he would have actually been found by All Might. As All Might would bust straight through the door of the bar, this would actually, no, not hours later, it would have been about a couple minutes later, seeing as there would have definitely been a lot of noise coming from the building, and All Might would have been the hero to report. That being said, this is when All Might would pick up the rubble off of Deku, and he would immediately notice who this was. He'd be like, "Midoriya." As he would immediately throw him on his shoulder and be like, "I found the student who wasn't present at the UA festival." As he would immediately take Deku to Recovery Girls, like the nurse, and this is while, well, the USJ stuff would have been happening. It's at this moment that Deku would basically be looked at by everybody after he wakes up about 2 hours later. This is when Recovery Girl would kiss him and his injuries would basically start to slowly fade away. You know, it's not like it's just going to completely go away immediately, but he definitely would have a lot of good. This when Deku would basically open his eyes widely as he would say, he's a villain. As it's at this point that Bakugo would, All Might, sorry, not Bakugo, but All Might would say, "What are you talking about?" And Deku would look at All Might as he would grab him and say, "Bakugo, he's a villain. He's with All For One." As All Might's eyes would widen and he would grip Deku's hands as he's like, "Please tell me you're joking." Deku would say he's not. It was a man with a mask. He seemed to be the leader of the organization. He gave Bakugo powers. I don't know how he did it, but Bakugo doesn't just have his normal quirk. He has more than just one quirk. I don't know what it is, but we need to figure it out. As this is when All Might would have start telling everybody to get out of the room. As he would look at Deku and tell him, listen to me. That man who you are saying is alive, you were in grave danger. If you would have not been in that situation you were, and your luck would have just been a bit worse, you would be dead right now. Deku would look at All Might as he would say, I know him, but I had to try to save Bakugo, but it looks like he didn't want to be saved. As it's at this point that All Might would say, right, he didn't want to be saved, so why did you do it? After you realized that you should have immediately gotten out of there and told the heroes about what's going on. But Deku would look at All Might as he would say, I couldn't just do that to him, All Might. Even though we may not be on the best terms and sometimes I may be a jerk to him, we are childhood friends after all, and I wouldn't be able to sleep with myself if my cowardice led to him going down the wrong path, but I wasn't strong enough to stop him, All Might. And I don't know if you will be either. He is powerful. You're probably going to be able to take him out, but his boss, he's on a completely different level. The aura I felt from him was just power, fear. It was intoxicating. All Might would look at Deku and say he knows very well who that man is, because about a couple years ago, he was the man who gave him this injury. Deku would feast his eyes on what All Might is talking about and immediately understand, as All Might would begin to explain one for all to him and how maybe, just maybe, he probably should have given the quirk to Deku. He may have been the chance of stopping him. Seeing as Deku's quirk is mimicry, he may have had the perfect capabilities to handle one for all off rip. But Deku would tell him that it doesn't matter who he gave it to, he doesn't want to know. What he does want to know is if All Might has a plan. All Might would look at Deku and say he does, and Deku would say great because I have photographic memory. We will be able to find them when the time comes. All Might would look at Deku and say good, as this is when he would say, well, pains me to say this, Midoriya, but you are going to be suspended from the UA course for a couple of days, about a week. As Deku would say that that's fair, he would then lay down, and for the next week, Deku would train, and he would go crazy. Deku would train in a way that Deku had completely never done. Because at this point, Deku thinks that yeah, he probably would have been able to beat Bakugo had he not gotten that first attack on him. However, Bakugo's definitely going to be training. So even if he could have beaten him back then, he doesn't know if that will still apply. If he's given more than just the quirks that he already has, Deku may not be even a single thing. He may not have even a sliver of a chance of defeating him. So this would lead to Deku just being like, all right, I need to get stronger. As he would train in a completely different level. This is when Deku would basically, of course, be suspended during the time that the hero students have their hero internships, meaning Stain would basically have joined the League of Villains. He would still end up hurting Ida and his brother, and the Nomu incident would basically still happen. However, Stain wouldn't be caught by the heroes this time because the League of Villains, or more specifically, All for One, would be the one who recruits him. And Bakugo still would be the one who, gives out the attack with the Nomus, because Bakugo's just going crazy at the moment. So, yeah, he ends up doing that still once he finds out about the hero killer. That being said, this is when Bakugo would basically end up getting trained by Stain. And this is going to be a lot of development as for Bakugo's just growth. This would lead to the people who ended up joining the League of Villains joining faster. And it's at this point that the UA dormitory system would basically be in place. UA would have ended up shutting down for a couple of days due to the fact that, Bakugo had to be reported sooner or later after the internships, and they would have a little bit of time to just recuperate, meaning Deku has even more time to train. However, Bakugo does as well, and this would lead to them all being told about the finals, which would of course lead to Deku training during that 1 week grace period, which he did get out of school. And this would basically lead to Deku doing all sorts of training and just pushing his body to be even more physically stronger than before. He even trains his body in taking hits. He would watch a bunch of videos on how to tank attacks, and he would just implement what they are showing to Deku, as Deku would implement how to take damage. during this entire week. And by the time that he goes back to the school for the finals, Deku is severely weakened because his body's still not done healing. That being said, this is when he would go in for the test taking part, and he would of course ace it because Deku is pretty much a genius. That being said, there's one thing that I did forget to add. Many of the students got actually taken out of UA after seeing what happened to Bakugo. He not only was taken, but taken. He was also turned into a villain. What would happen if UA isn't good enough to protect them next time? They may be the next villains, and they don't want that. Or even worse, they may be killed. And none of the parents would want that for their children. So a lot of students would get taken out, more of the weaker ones. So that doesn't really matter too much. That being said, this is when the fight against All Might would basically happen. Deku would have to fight All Might with Todoroki in this version, and seeing as he does have support this time, they actually end up doing far better than what Bakugo and Deku did in canon. See, the match would start with Todoroki creating a bunch of ice and Deku just kind of running around All Might. As All Might would just punch it all away, Deku would be right beside him at the very last second, as Deku would jump on All Might, grab him in a headlock, to which he tells All Might that one single move and All Might's life ends. All Might would, just being under these horrible circumstances, would pretty much be like, fine, I yield. As it's at this point that Deku would let go of All Might slightly, and All Might would just rush at the wall full speed, slamming Deku into it. As Deku grabs onto All Might's hand, this one Deku would snap All Might's wrist and judo slam him onto the ground. As it's at this point that Todoroki comes in and shoots him with a giant iceberg, to which Deku would backflip to get away from, and All Might would just be stuck inside of this giant ice glacier. He's in the Ice Age basically. Deku and Todoroki would escape, and this is when the forest training arc would begin. Of course, many of the events that you guys will basically be thinking will happen will of course still happen, just like in canon, such as of course them all being on the bus and all doing like a little bit of road game just to kind of pass the time. A lot of people would have ended up leaving, therefore morale would be kind of down. However, there would be some people who are kind of making things a little lit, like let's say Suyu and Mina. They're both very bold, so they'd be playing truth or dare. They'd be making the trip there very, very fun, to say the least. That being said, this is when they would basically all arrive, and Mandalay would of course still throw them all over the railing. Of course, because they all need to arrive to the point that they were all given, just like in the original. And this would basically lead to them all arriving about at the same time in canon. Deku is pretty strong. Actually, no, it would take them about an hour longer, due to the fact that they don't have the assets that they had before, such as Koda, Invisible Girl, Mineta. I'm gonna say Kaminari even got kicked out. Jiro's not there anymore. Yeah, a lot of people got taken from the hero course. They had a lot less help, so it took them about the same amount of time, and that is when they would all arrive. Deku would be pretty tired, but he'd be pretty excited at the training, that opportunity that he just got. It was great for his body and his ability to take attacks and give them. He's pretty strong, even more than what he was before. That being said, this is when they would arrive. And when Koda tried to punch Deku straight in the, the area, his family jewels, Deku dodged the blow, and he quite literally stomped on Koda's foot, just breaking it completely. Koda would start crying immediately, and Mandalay would be like, what did this kid just do to my Koda? This is when Deku would see that kid just tried to punch him in his area, and Mandalay would just be like, and this is when Deku would be like, yeah, so he better apologize, because I did something that could potentially maybe hurt him for about a week, maybe a month, but he was going to do something to me that would have ruined my chances of having a literal kid. So who do you think was in the wrong here? Mandalay would be like, you still shouldn't have done that. And Deku would be like, whatever. So he'd basically leave and go on to train. Aizawa would be like, that kid has, so much potential. However, he does come with a little bit of baggage with him. And Mandalay would say, you don't say. As they would basically all go away. And for the next 2 days, Deku would train relentlessly, extremely hard, doing things that no other person should be doing. And this is when nighttime would arrive. This is when a giant explosion can be heard coming from the villains' directions. They would have of course arrived, except In this version, things would be a lot different. If you guys do remember, in the USJ version of events, many of the villains didn't actually end up getting captured. A lot of them ended up getting teleported away by Kurogiri. Not only that, but Stain is there, and the rest of the villains who are usually at the attack are there, present, as well as 20 Nomus, which are low-end Nomus, however, Nomus at that. And this means that the attack on the heroes would happen now. The attack that should have happened during the USJ would be happening now. As this all happened, Muscular and all of them would be rushing at a bunch of students, and they wouldn't be doing their nighttime little event that they had in the original. This is when all of them are eating with their guards down and tired, meaning many of the hero students barely have any of the energy to handle the villains, and the Wild Pussycats would basically be the only real thing that they have in order to basically stop the villains. That being said, Deku would rush at, Toga and Spinner, as Stain would actually arrive, and he would have to fight against Toga, Stain, and Spinner, as Deku would be copying Stain's movements. He would follow as he would grab one of Toga's arms, bend the wrist as he would snap them and throw her at Spinner's direction, to which Spinner gets thrown back, but Stain would cut at Deku, as Deku would, before Stain even gets a chance to lick the blood, he would kick Stain's blade into the air, catch it, as he would immediately morph his weapon into a gun, as he would shoot Stain right in the skull, just completely taking him out of commission. Deku would be looked at by Aizawa as he said, "Kids, there's no killing," but Deku would look at him and say, "Look at the situation we're in. It's kill or be killed. Now, do your job." Aizawa would understand, as he would turn off Muscular's quirk and rush at him, as immediately he would take Muscular out, and this is while all that is happening, Todoroki would be fighting against Dabi, as guess who's the one who gets clapped? Yeah, it's not Dabi, it's Todoroki. Todoroki can't even use his fire at this point yet, so yeah, he gets stomped pretty awfully. That being said, All Might is actually going to be present in the forest training, and he is actually going to be the one who's basically fighting against many of the small villains, as well as all 20 of the Nomus, with the wild cats, of course. That being said, the guy with the blood quirk, the teacher of Class 1B, would be handling some of the other fodder villains, and Aizawa would have moved on to, some of the other villains, such as Dabi, Mr. Compress, and, all the other more cool people, I guess you could say. But seeing as he can disable their quirks, they're kind of fodder to Aizawa, seeing as without their quirks, they're kind of nothing, except for, what's the name? Twice. Twice actually can throw hands, so yeah, Twice can definitely do something to Dabi. I mean, Twice can definitely do something to Aizawa. That being said, this is when Aizawa, or no, not Aizawa, I'm so dumb, but Bakugo and All For One would both be at the mountaintop, as Bakugo would release an explosion, a giant one at that, signaling to two people which he knew would arrive after seeing that: Deku and All Might. See, these villains were never here with the purpose of obviously ending All Might and Deku. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to weaken them for them. Because why would they fight a full-powered All Might and Deku when they could simply weaken them and then proceed to take them out? This is when Bakugo and All For One would smile, as they would be laughing up top. And All For One would look at Bakugo as he would say, "It was my right decision to choose you as my successor, child. You will be a great fit for this world." Bakugo would be smiling as he would say, "I don't care about that, but the weaklings gotta go down at some point, am I right?" All For One would smile and say, "You're certainly right, my boy." As it's at this point that All Might and Deku would both end off their battles, and there would be about 5 Nomus left for the rest of the students and the heroes to basically handle. It would be a very even battle, and there would actually be 0 casualties on the side of the heroes. However, on the side of the villains, there's a couple of casualties, because these kids are not the same ones that they were before. They know that Bakugo got kidnapped and he is now a villain. They are not going to be letting any of that happen to them. They'd rather die than become villains themselves. And it's at this point that 2 of the greatest battles in this series would begin: All Might versus All For One, and Deku versus Bakugo. It's to this point that All Might and All For One would have a battle very, very similar to the one in canon, therefore I will not be covering. However, All Might would definitely be weaker. He let out a lot more percentage of One For All than he had in the original version with All For One, meaning he's weaker. Plus, he has to look at Bakugo every time that he turns to his right and just see his failure. Deku would be fighting against Bakugo, and their fight would be the one to cover. If you guys do want to be seeing how Deku and Bakugo fight, I may or may not be inserting a little Once Justice fight with Deku and Bakugo at this moment. It really just depends on whether I have the energy, which probably won't, but you know, there's a chance. There's a slight chance in case you're watching this, and if you watch the actual video, you may either see my little brother doing the gameplay, because you know, I don't feel like doing it, or you may see me doing the Bakugo and Deku fight, which is a very small chance. But that being said, this is when Deku would basically rush at Bakugo. As they would both lunge at each other, Bakugo would shoot an explosion which would propel him to the side, which Deku would have actually been expecting it. Deku got used to Bakugo's unorthodox movements, and Deku was actually able to keep up with Bakugo. However, he was not able to land any blows, and this is when Deku would actually end up morphing his weapon into a giant scythe, as he would slash in the air, creating a wind pressure which is actually pretty powerful that pushes Bakugo's explosions back. However, Bakugo would use his ability to basically read movements, and he would look at Deku and read him like a book. As they would both be going back and forth, Deku would drop his weapon on the ground, as this is going to be important later, and they would both land blow for blow. It would be very similar to the fight which Naruto and Sasuke had, where they were both just landing the final blows and they were just both completely out of energy. Yeah, at this point they would be starting very strong, but Deku is tired, and Bakugo's body still hasn't healed from the intense training and slices that Stain has placed on him, as well as Deku is very physically strong, and even stronger than what he would remember. This would lead to a clean ass fight. If it was animated, this would be so fire. But Deku and Bakugo would just be going back and forth, just continuously fighting each other. Deku would be landing blows, Bakugo would as well. This is when Deku would say, "Why won't you give up?" As he would say, "You know I'm gonna win." And Bakugo would just say, "In your dreams, loser." As he would blast him with a double impact explosion, Deku would be flown back. And it's at this point that All Might would be about to get landed the final blow. Deku would get distracted by just this right amount of moment, and it's at this point that Bakugo would aim his hand at Deku's direction, as he's getting ready to launch his most powerful explosion, which would of course kill Deku. However, this is when suddenly Mirio would show up, as he would distract Bakugo by hitting All For One so hard that All For One got blown back. Bakugo would immediately in that moment get caught off guard, and it's at this point that Deku would smile, as Mirio would end up fighting against All For One side by side. They would tag team him, and it's at this point that Deku would stand up as Bakugo begins to monologue. Deku would look at him with a smile on his face, as Bakugo just gets angry at the fact that Deku's smiling at him, and this is when Deku would heal up just enough to say, "Good riddance, you damn bastard," as it's at this point that Bakugo turns around and sees a turret behind him, as that thing literally starts blasting Bakugo relentlessly. The bullets immediately go through Bakugo's body, and it's at this point that Deku would drop down to the ground, passing out, and the impact of All For One, All Might, and Mirio's battle would affect Bakugo pretty decently. Boys, if you guys hear like a little bit of a lawnmower sound outside, I do apologize for that. It is my neighbor, and I do realize that it's maybe annoying if you guys can hear it, but I'm not 100% positive if you guys can. That being said, I'm going to go back into the story. This is when Deku would basically pass out, and of course, All For One would get destroyed by a 50% Mirio with all the quirks that Deku has in the manga, plus All Might with his final embers of One For All. They would completely destroy All For One, and he would actually end up dying in this version of events. After that, this is when many of the boring stuff would happen in the Boku no Hero manga. The anime. Regarding, Deku would basically have to be in the hospital for a while, seeing as, he did get in a pretty big heated battle for about 2 weeks, seeing as his body was overworked. Not only that, but it was damaged slightly beyond repair, and Deku would get a couple of explosion markings which will never heal. they're going to be reminders of his failure and what he did to Bakugo. Because even though he may not have forced Bakugo to become a villain, even though he may not have basically been the reason that Bakugo did it all on himself, Deku was, he was partially responsible. And that being said, this is when the provisional license exam would happen. And, all the other little stuff that happens in the, My Hero Academia timeline basically ends up happening. See, let me look at the timeline real quick so I can give you guys a perfect summary of what happens. See, of course, we will now be having the provisional hero license, and everybody that's actually left in UA would end up actually getting expelled. Not expelled, but gone. Everybody who was left in UA after that final attack, which many of their lives were just severely threatened, UA would have closed down, and many of the students would end up having to go to other schools. They will still end up having their provisional hero license exam. However, UA, it would be done. There is no more UA. After the previous failure of Bakugo becoming a villain and Bakugo dying now, as well as many other students being in critical condition, UA would completely get shut down. And, many of the third years had to go to other schools, meaning overhaul stuff, that doesn't get resolved until Mirio finally becomes a pro hero and is able to finally save Eri, resulting in no remedial course, no UA sports festival, no pro hero arc, no joint training arc, and the rest of the students kind of just have to go to different schools in general. Deku ends up having to attend Shiketsu High for his final years of becoming a pro hero, and Deku does just that. He ends up becoming the number 2 hero alongside Mirio, and he and Mirio actually end up developing a pretty cool relationship. Deku is actually able to go toe-to-toe with Mirio when he's not using One For All, because Mirio is just too fast and too powerful. Mirio does end up dying young, however, because, One For All with people with quirks, it just doesn't turn out very well, to say the least. That being said, this is when we are now going to be ending What If Deku Was Taskmaster. I hope you guys enjoyed this series, seeing as it was pretty dope to record, and I hope you guys enjoyed what I did at the end there, the final battle. I hope you guys enjoyed the final hurrah. That being said, it has been your boy Zether. I hope you guys enjoyed this series, and I am out. Peace.